Hello,
Hello, I am Emily,
and I'm Sophie.
and this is our podcast named
Stories of Strength.
Today we'll be talking about the stories of people who were once enslaved.
I will be talking about Frederick Douglass, who was born on February 1818. He was born into slavery.
And I'll be talking about Solomon Northup, born in July 10th, 1808. He was born free.
So today we have a few questions for each other.
Yeah.
I'll ask the first one. What did they have to go through?
Well, in 1841, he was offered a traveling show by two white men. Unfortunately, instead they drugged him, kidnapped him, and sold him into slavery. Solomon suffered many hardships as a slave when he was first kidnapped. He was beaten until he felt bone. He was soon sold and brought onto a ship where he'd be transferred to a master named Tibetes. How about you?
Frederick Douglass had a main slave owner. His name was Captain Anthony. He was always busy because he was always a sailor, or he would sail boats most of the time. But he had another man in the fields watching all the other slaves, making sure that they're not doing anything wrong. He was a very aggressive and angry man. He would whip the slaves for no reason exact. It got so bad to the point where Captain Anthony saw what he was doing and threatened to whip him himself.
Whoa. Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah?
Why would he whip them so harshly?
During the research I was reading, it said that he was a very drunk man. So it was probably all of the alcohol that he was consuming doing that to him. But that was still very wrong of him to do.
Oh, yeah. Well, do you have another question?
Yeah. What were the living conditions like?
Well, Solomon lived in rough conditions. They had coarse bedding, no floor or windows, and lived with little food, and always had a fear of being punished. How about you?
Wait, if they had no windows, was it just walls and holes in the house?
Yeah, they lived outside in a little cabin with barely anything to sustain their living conditions. It was horrible.
Well, for me, the slaves of Captain Anthony would get a monthly amount of money. But although that would have been good, but they had to sleep on the floor with just one blanket and no pillow or anything. In the morning, they would have to wake up super early by a horn, a really loud horn. If they weren't awake and ready and prepared by the time the horn blew, they would get in huge trouble. They also had no clean clothes and was barely fed any food.
Whoa, that sounds harsh. Well, I have another question for you.
Yep.
What was their work like?
Well, Frederick Douglass was a field hand, which meant he worked on the plantations. For example, he worked in the fields and the farms.
Oh,
What about yours?
well, mine is similar. Solomon usually worked tirelessly in the plantations, picking cotton with others. They worked hard and endlessly due to the cruel punishments they would receive, earning rewards like 3.5 pounds of bacon and corn, enough to make a small meal.
Wow, that's brutal.
I know, right? Well, how are their families affected?
Well, Frederick Douglass was separated from his mother at a really young age. He had no connections to her because they both got moved away from each other. She died when he was very young. But what is sad is that there was a rumor going around that his father was his own slave owner.
Whoa, did that make life harder for him?
Well, knowing that his slave owner could have been his dad, that would have been like mind-blowing. And he was also hated by the mistress, which makes everything harder for him.
Oh, wow. Well, Solomon's family did not know what had happened to him. He tried to write countless letters to inform them of his disappearance during his enslavement. He also witnessed how it affected his peers and their families. Families did not want to be parted and refused to be sold separately.
Are you still recording?
Well, I have another question.
Yeah?
How did they resist slavery?
Well, Solomon resisted in many ways. Because he was born free, he resisted endlessly. He acted passively when he was with the slave dealer, Burge. Solomon was tied up and had just regained consciousness from being drugged. At that time, he was told he was now a slave, not a free man. Solomon denied endlessly, refusing to be in bondage no matter how many times he was whipped. He would not accept being a slave. Later, on a ship, he would plot against the captain, trying to kill him and overtake the ship. Unfortunately, that plan was never executed. Instead, he gained trust of one of those on board through his story and snuck paper and pencil to write letters out for help. He later became active in his resistance when he was with the Tybites. As the master would punish him, Solomon's anger grew, and he soon snatched the whip out of his master's hand, whipping him back until he cried murder. How about you?
Wait, I have a question of what you just said.
Yeah?
Why did he resist being a slave if he knew he was a slave?
Well, he wasn't born a slave, and he was brought into bondage unfairly and illegally. Those men who drugged him and kidnapped him would have been arrested if it was not for his skin color.
That's brutal.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, Frederick Douglass educated other slaves on how to escape, but before he ran away, he knew how to read, which helped him learn how to run away. But he didn't want to tell his owners that he knew how to read because that would get him in trouble, and he would most likely get sent away to another place, and he'd get moved away from his friends again.
Well, I have another question before we go over everything.
Yeah?
How did they gain freedom?
Well, Frederick Douglass escaped slavery in 1838 by disguising himself as a sailor. He also borrowed identity papers. After years of planning, while he was being a slave, he boarded a train which led him to a steamboat. The steamboat led him to New York City, where he was finally free and officially escaped and found freedom. What about yours?
Well, Solomon had a really difficult time escaping because there was a lot of patrollers who would watch for runaways. Not only them, but poor whites who would harass them endlessly for a reward. Fortunately, later, you're gonna have to cut this out. Fortunately, later, on January 4th, 1853, Solomon was able to notify his family and be rescued. He filed charges against those who had kidnapped him, but they were soon dropped.
How did he file that?
Well, he went to the police office and filed for the two men who had kidnapped him. But because at that time there was still lots of racism, they did not take his case seriously and soon dropped it.
That's really sad. That also goes to the other question that we just had for each other about why he resisted to be a slave.
Yeah.
Well, I have another question for you.
Yeah?
How do they act passively and aggressively?
Well, Solomon acted passively when denying he was a slave, refusing to utter those untrue words. He later acted actively by taking a whip and beating his master. How about yours?
Well, when he acted passively, he acted like he didn't know how to read, which he didn't want them to know. He then acted actively when he dressed up as a sailor and escaped.
Wow, he was brave for doing that.
Yeah.
Well, they've lived a long life.
Yeah,
How about we go over their achievements?
Yeah, they did definitely have many achievements since they had to escape that brutal treatment.
What are some achievements Frederick Douglass had?
Okay, so I'll go to one and then you can do one and then we'll just keep taking turns.
All right.
So the first achievement, which both of them definitely made, he definitely escaped slavery.
Well, both of ours. For mine, he had accomplishments such as being a popular musician.
He did music?
Yeah, he was a professional at the violin.
Do you know how he learned that?
No, but I can probably guess he's been learning it since he was little, since he would be scouted for it, his talents.
Oh, yes. My second achievement is how did he became a leader to help others escape?
Whoa, how did he help others escape?
With the Underground Railroad. This also leads to Harriet Tubman. He partnered with her to help many other slaves escape.
Wow. Well, Solomon advocated for abolition many times, and he was also a carpenter.
Wow, he has many accomplishments that I would never expect from him.
Right?
Well, the third one for mine, he wrote stories of what happened to him during slavery.
Oh my gosh, same. Solomon wrote a memoir called 12 Years a Slave. This influenced many people.
So they definitely have a lot in common. My next one is, he also became a powerful speaker. He would make speeches to make others recognize what slaves had to go through.
Same. He would show up a lot to. Yeah, I already said all mine.
I have one more.
Yeah?
He stood up for women's rights.
Yes.
Well, that's it for our podcast. See you guys next time. This is signing out from Sophie Tashman
And Emily Nguyen.
Bye!
Bye.